Well, as many of you know, or don't know, perhaps, I have been a long advocate of studying fear, anxiety, and all its cousins, and how to transform that, how to manage it, how to master it, how to transmute it. There are many ways that we could talk about this relationship that we have with fear in our world. I am a fearologist, and from now on, you can call me RMF. Robert Michael Fisher, if you like, or you can call me the fearologist, if you like, or you can call me the artist, as they do at the daycare where I volunteer a few times a week. The point being of this kind of strangeness of my approach to the topic of fear, and perhaps the strangeness of my very life existence, is you look at the background here and look at me and listen to me talk, you might immediately say, wow, this is like strange. This guy is strange. And I see those expressions on people's faces sometimes when I speak. And sometimes they say, well, it's because you have a PhD and you use big words. But I actually know that that's not the actual concern most people have around me. They have the concern that I'm not talking straight within how they think and talk, and how the world wants to pay attention to the whole economy of attraction to a certain way to be, to speak, to look, to act, and that everybody will therefore be in a bubble of that attraction. In digital world, we've kind of, coded that as you'll get likes on your podcast, video, presentation, whatever it is, or you'll get dislikes, right? Well, today is all about more how to get dislikes. Now, that's my practice right now, is how to be an educator teacher about fear and fearlessness and get more dislikes. And I think I would be much more successful, quite frankly, um, for RMF. Um, Perhaps it would even increase my income so that they can tax my income more. Perhaps not. And perhaps I'll just live out a life of a very calm, disturbed, strange retirement. Well, I'm going to now talk about a practitioner who's an artist at Stanford. Her name is Jody Odell, and from now on, I will call J.O. Now, this whole thing of replacing, well, I should say a little bit about J.O. She's strange, and she's a professor at Harvard, teaches art education in higher levels of art education for educators to go out and teach art to children and others, which I would think would be just fantastic, and or artists who just want to get educated. What a concept. Anyways, this all is pretty interesting to me, so I will bring some of her video in from a clip she talked at Google, and her book, and what she's becoming famous for, I forgot right now, famous for something, for what not to do. Or I think the book title is actually How to Do Nothing. And it's a resistance, subtitle, to the attention economy. My understanding as a fearologist, the attention economy, right? How the whole commodified world of space, time, actions, everything between almost, is commodified as a way to get attention, to get you to look at the screen, to get you to push certain buttons, to get certain apps. And then these huge corporate structures that own most of that technology, those platforms, will just be raking in dollars every time they've got your attention. Well, that becomes a very disturbing way to live in the world, right? It's like not only disturbing, it's kind of strange, but that's a strange kind of way of making profit. My talk today in Jenny Odell's presentation, which I will comment on as I go through her video a little bit, 5, 6 minutes of it. It's quite interesting and definitely strange, that we are interested in not doing things for profit and productivity. Notice prophetic is a much more interesting idea to us, perhaps, but prophetic in a strange way, not creating profit. And that is a little bit of my interest. And then the subtext of why would you listen to this talk if you are someone curious about anxiety and fear and all those things that I talk about a lot, and depression and whatever, anxiety disorder, manic depression, that cycling that is so common of a dis-ease, disorder, to our normal way of being that creates so much attention these days. And the clinical people, the psychiatrists, psychologists, school counselors, educators are all concerned. There's so much anxiety in young people. And I'm sort of saying, okay, so how would this video be useful to people that suffer from these kinds of conditions and the whole notion of a fear economy? So I don't say we just have an attention economy. We have an attention economy because we fear not getting people's attention and getting likes. And for, again, the big corporate companies, they get profit, but also private and entrepreneurs are doing the same thing. They want your attention so that they can sell some service, some product, some course for you to take. All about profiting from attention, but little of the prophetic, in depth, soul, imaginal, irrational, creative, innovative, domain necessarily involved at all. Attention can be caught very superficially. But I'll leave that up to Jenny Odell from here on in, if I can remember to call her J.O. So this strategy of using letters for people's names came recently with going to a conference that was all about this one person's work, almost. And their name was continually repeated in every session of the conference and their work, etc., etc. And I eventually, when I was on the panel and presenting, I decided I'm not going to use this person's name, even though the conference is pretty much produced by them, directed by them, and created around the book that they just wrote. And it was in education philosophy and applications to how to improve this great philosophy for education. I was at the conference speaking, and I gave my viewpoint from a fearlessness perspective, and I said I'm going to start with not calling this person by their name every time there's some reference to it, which is hard to avoid when the conference is supposed to be all of us responding to their book. So I decided to just call them, by their initial AK in that term. And I like it because it also gets around all the gender political correct language of, people's pronouns and other kinds of labels that they want for identity. And I'm not against those, but I just find it's easier if I just talk about, AK and JO. And we'll leave it up to the audience to decide if they want to put all those political labels. I'm not interested in putting all those political identity labels on. I find them quite distractive for the most part about what I'm really interested in, and that is how afraid are we of being in the world with any identity? And does any identity, name, label, politics of give us any kind of different experience that is one that is not fear-based ultimately? So I think without further ado, I'll just remind you, JO, and I'm going to comment on their work, and we're going to see a pretty interesting idea of what I'm calling the strange attractor. Oh yeah, that's another subtext for this talk. How to become a strange attractor in your life. And when I say how to become, I'm joking. The how to is a joke, right? How to is always a way to get attraction, attention, sell something. How to get rid of your fear, how to overcome obesity, how to make $1 million. So all of that how to, it's a joke. And JO uses it in their book as how to do nothing. Becoming quite a famous speaker. So let's go up and look at her on the screen share and get started. All right, Jo, take it away. I'll comment when I need to. Jo is going to start with talking about their own art, JO's art. Speaking at Google, which is a pretty high platform for any speaker to get into Google New York here in this case, to talk about their work. And I believe JO is just beginning to give a few examples of their understanding of art, what I call the arational in my language. In other people's language, a few others are using this term arational. It's not irrational and it's not rational, something in between. And I think we'll see some of what Jo likes as ways of doing nothing and how that might be useful to you. And my video, I will end today with how to do nothing may actually be one of the best cures to fear, anxiety, depression, and all the fear-based related ailments of our world. Now that is strange.
It's like I collect pieces of things and I reorder them. That's kind of all I do, and I research them, and I hope to make someone see them in a new light. So that you can be accused with that kind of art of making nothing. One of my favorite pieces of art that could suffer from the same accusation. This is a map by Eleanor Coppola, who is the wife of Francis Ford Coppola, and it is a map for a specific day in which participants were asked to visit these different locations, and they all have store windows, and it was just called Windows. And on this specific day, you're supposed to go and just look in the window, and that was the art. And it's a public art piece, but if you think about how public art pieces normally feel, they're like a giant steel sculpture in the middle of a corporate plaza. It feels very decontextualized, and it's very like, I made some art, here it is.
I made some art, here it is. This is the notion of if I actually do something really good and I work really hard to do it good, and if I even overcome my fear really good, that somehow I will be rewarded with this great heroic idea of the production. And so artists can also get caught in that and get big dollars for a public art installation of that she's describing. And then we get to the place of but what about for all of us relating to that, not just the great celebrity of some kind, the famous, the glorious, and that can of course cause a huge amount of anxiety that we are living our lives and not attaining that kind of production. So Jo is really working at what I would call more an anti-hero narrative, although anti is a very soft in terms of how to be not a hero and really enjoy life. I would say Jo has some really interesting ideas about how to do that.
This is more like, oh no, there's something like I'm just going to frame your experience so that you see something in a new light. And then one other related example. This is a piece by my friend Scott Pollock called "Applause Encouraged," and people signed up to be ushered into this space right before the sunset. They watched the sunset, they applauded, and then they were served refreshments.
Yeah, I'm kind of working on that myself. Is before I start my videos or after I do my talks, have a sign that, or a T-shirt that says "Applause Encouraged." You might do that too. Let's start printing them. Applause encouraged.
This is the kind of art that I like and that I try to make. So you can see, making nothing. So yeah, I was sitting in the rose garden and I started thinking about what the architecture of nothing would be if there were such a thing. And I was struck by this particular garden. It has a kind of labyrinthine quality to it. It's not very big, but the way it's designed makes it possible to spend a really long time there walking around and sitting in different places. It also has a really interesting mix of cultivated elements, but also wild elements like oak trees. And overall, it just struck me not only as a space of wandering, but of care and maintenance, because you'll often see volunteers doing gardening there. This kind of ethic of care and maintenance. And that in terms of that design, I was thinking about labyrinths in general and how they allow you to not quite stand still and not move through a space, but actually do something in between. I think there's a lot of similarity with the idea of just going for a walk instead of walking to a place, especially
going for a walk instead of walking to a place. This is a practice of the irrational that My partner, Barbara Bickle, an artist as well, educator, we have done a few times and find it a really fascinating experience. Sounds very simple. And then I was thinking of how to apply this to an entire education system, um, as one of the major practices of the education system, whatever level you're talking about. But let's just go right down to the daycare where I work, and they have a forest program, which you know maybe you don't know, but forest programs are becoming more and more interesting, attractive. Parents are paying good dollars to have children go and have these experiences in forest schools. So they're outdoors 50% of the time of the day of their schooling. And that's the case at where I am working in Nanaimo Innovation Academy. Couldn't hardly say that this morning. Okay, so the idea of a pedagogy of doing nothing. Can you imagine coming into a classroom, or let's just say taking kids out on a walk in the forest, and just give them a practice, right? Because normally they're going to pay attention to all the things they do. They're going to do the normal things of what the forest program education process is about. But what I'm encouraging them as educators, well, I haven't encouraged them yet, but I want to, but I'm sure I'll be disliked for it because I'm going to say, have you ever got the children to think about how to do nothing for a certain amount of time? And I'm not just talking about, well, let's go to a sit spot and sit there and listen and do deep listening. See, already asking them to do that is already asking them to do something. The much more interesting challenge educationally and for our little brains, can you imagine 3 to 5 year olds what they'll do with this? No, I really am asking you to just do nothing, and I'll put a timer on. We'll ring a bell, and we'll ring a bell when it's over. It'll be a certain amount of time, and the practice doing nothing and quote see what happens. That is the kind of education that we're talking about. That's what Jenny's talking about, how to live a life of this strange attraction to nothing.
Especially trying to get there on time. Going for a walk, you've achieved your goal if you're walking. you're already walking. And then as for a kind of auditory example of this, non-spatial or non-visual, I was really inspired by the composer Pauline Oliveros, who's a classically trained composer, but moved into this thing that she called deep listening, and also various improvisational performances. But deep listening for her was a practice of listening as much as possible to everything that you could possibly listen to around you, including your own thoughts. So it's not just outward, it's outward and inward. And that for her, the point of doing that was that our culture privileges judgment and analysis over listening and receiving. And
Culture privileges and analysis and evaluation, right? Good, bad, dislike, like. Instead of what I'm suggesting to really practice is how to do nothing, is we replace all that like dislike with things like attracted to, allergenic, right? Or allergic to, and or practice taking care of something, not taking care of something, and just play with these different oppositions, so called, and just replace them with like and dislike per se. But that would be a whole other thing that we have to reframe to get out of trying to be in control and then worried about being out of control. Take the example of fear. Um, we're caught, I believe, in a very big problem of how we actually frame the experience of fear. We don't frame it in a way that is open ended, in the way that we hear J.O. experimenting with and other artists in the arational. And you don't have to just be an artist to play with this, obviously. But this idea that do something in between. It's not getting to the destination. But there is a great richness of learning, attention, care, ethical development, soul development, spiritual development, whatever it might be. That would again be up to you and your relationship and others that you're maybe even practicing this do nothing together with. in terms of fear, why I think we're so locked in and are not advancing very much in our relationship with fear in a mature way, in a really healthy way, in a sustainable, healthy, sane way, to be blunt, is because we're continually trying to move toward controlling fear because somehow we've judged it. See, and there's the analysis, and it's wrong, it's bad, it's got all these negative feelings, it may have pain, and so on. And then we try to get over here, which is that we manage it and we master and we cope with it or transform it, liberate ourselves from it, right? The other great rescue from this side. And this whole notion of doing nothing, how to do nothing with fear. There's an interesting phrase just popped out of me in the moment. And I thought, okay, that's kind of what Jo is talking about. This is the second mindset that is not one of analysis and correction. How to have a relationship without that. And so, there's this great book by Alan Watts, The Wisdom of Insecurity, A Message for an Age of Anxiety, written in 1951. I've just been reading bits of it. And let me just read a little intro to it by Alan Watts. By all outward appearances, our life is a spark of light between one eternal darkness and another. Nor is the interval between these two nights an unclouded day. For the more we are able to feel pleasure, the more we are vulnerable to pain. And whether in background or foreground, the pain is always with us. We have become accustomed to make this existence worthwhile by the belief that there is more than the outward appearance, that we live for a future beyond this life here, for the outward appearance does not seem to make sense. If living is to end in pain, incompleteness, and nothingness, it seems cruel and a futile experience for beings who are born to reason, hope, create, and love. A little playful critique in there, and Alan Watts, of course, a very Buddhist Eastern type thinker, non-dual, and attempting to actually undermine that we think moving and trying to attain security will be the freedom from our insecurity. He talks about the law of reverse, which is found in many of the wisdom traditions around the world in his next chapter. And it's really the reverse is to do nothing, to not attempt to move from insecurity to security, and not try to even move from security to insecurity for some reason that might be getting attention and be valuable to creating a fear-based world, for example, that could be commodified, marketed, and then say, well, we'll deliver you the authority, we'll deliver you the right services, the product, the security systems, everything, the insurance policies, the police, the guards, the military, the bombs to create security. Right. How to do nothing is something also our government leaders would need a lot of help with, and we can encourage that. But we, as individual citizens, this is really JO's notion, we can resist this intention fear economy.
And that because of that, we need to specifically practice that second mindset. And I realized that I had unintentionally learned deep listening through the practice of bird watching, or as I call it, bird noticing. Because if you are a bird watcher, you know that half or if not more of the time you hear something first and then you look for it. And so and the other thing I just want to mention about bird watching is that I use binoculars as an example of technology when I talk to my students at Stanford, because I think it's really easy to draw a hard line around what we think is technology, but binoculars are a form of like augmented vision that allow me to see things that I can't see with a unaided eye. So yeah, deep listening was something that I realized I already had a connection with, but hadn't really thought into very specifically about. And I was also thinking about the granularity of attention. I had this embarrassing moment where I realized that my mom speaks 3 languages, not 2. So for almost up until I was, basically an adult, I thought that my mom was only speaking English and Tagalog. And the only reason I thought that was that anything that wasn't English sounded like Tagalog to me that she was speaking. And then at some point, I realized she was actually speaking 3 languages, and I asked her to say the same thing in each one. And as you can see, they're completely different. And they're not dialects, they are distinct languages. This is a map of languages in the Philippines, which, a lot of people just think like, oh, people in the Philippines speak Tagalog, right? So I think there's something really instructive in this feeling of embarrassment where you thought that thought that 2 things were one thing, and then you realize it's actually 10 things, it's actually 20 things. And
There's a real key, wonderful point. Myself being a bird noticer for most of my life, sometimes called bird watcher, um, and there's a common expression that you'll be walking around down at the shore like we were last night, and I heard someone yell out, "Oh, there's some seagulls," and part of me goes, "Yeah, I know that's the common discourse. That's the way most people have been learned and taught." Um, Even in children's books, picture of a seagull, and the text for children, and I've seen it in every education system ever, and it's always seagulls. It's generic. It's just like saying, "Oh, there's humans," and then you realize is that you're completely ignoring that there's individuals in those categories, whether it's seagulls or humans or whatever the category of generic is. And not only that, there's, at least 8 to 10, 12 species of gulls that are probably 5 or 6 of those species are actually in your area, and they all are different species. They have different behaviors, they have different ecologies, and more or less. And the very term seagull is, oh, there's a seagull, erases all of those kinds of very interesting other possibilities of knowing and getting to know who these other beings, these even ancestors to us who were here before we were on Earth. And so we're probably not, just by using the word seagull, going to access very much intelligence. Um, right, access some, but the generic concept, the construct, right, that particular analytical construct. And then, of course, some people, the word seagulls is immediately, oh, seagulls are going to shit on you, so be careful. And I can watch people walking around and trying to avoid um, wild creatures because they're messy, unpredictable, and they might shit on you in the terms of birds. So this would be really a nightmare, right? If you're all dressed up in your nice goods walking down the ocean walkway. So I think that's probably lots for JO today. I'll stop the share. A little bit of a recap then. We're talking about the art of doing nothing, which you can see that pretty much everything JO talked about is about framing experience in this minimalist way, which I like to call minusio, which is more complex than minimalism in art and philosophy. But the minusio idea, or this framing of doing nothing, is what I also call, I'm starting to call it as being a strange attractor to the strange. And it's embarrassment, attraction to, it's okay to be embarrassed by not knowing. Jo talked about that with her mother and the number of languages she spoke. Um, she didn't realize her mom was speaking 3 languages all these years, and then had this embarrassment that, oh, I was missing something. And she said, that's a really good space. And Jo would turn that into a space of, not just what can you do with that, but be with it in now a relationship of being with another, even in embarrassment. And I'm actually saying being with another in the experience of fear, fearing itself, is actually a place of generativity without needing to be productivity, right? For profit, to get likes, to be recognized as that's what we want. You conform, you belong, you're regular like us, we like you. This artistic, irrational, aesthetic, affective way of being in the world, in the, she cutely calls how to do nothing, is much more about receiving, and you're not in that sense, doing nothing. The human being living as we're connected to the environment is not doing nothing. See, even if I say I'm doing nothing, I'm sitting here, my environment is doing lots. My environment is not completely disconnected from me. It's like the temperature regulation of the thermostat's going on, the spider that's crawling up behind my books and is eating its meal for the day, and all of the things going on, the noises, sounds just on the edges of my environment and outside the window. I can hear the hums. There's lots going on. There's nothing there. And yet the idea is to be able to enter the nothingness without this fear and not do it as an action of, okay, I'm not going to experience fear so that I can experience nothingness. Or I'm going to do this meditation and be so disciplined in yoga, and I'm going to do this spiritual practice, and I'm going to do this diet, and I'm going to do this, do this, do this to get to there. What Jo, if you got some of the gist of very short video, I mean, I clipped it here, obviously. Um, there's a much more interesting, playful space of being strange and being a stranger. So let me just end with that. I wrote up on my whiteboard up in our room, which is where my wife and I, Barbara, come to think about how are we relating to each other and all the things we're relating to, right? In our research work, our scholarship, and things that we could do productively, of course. We're also looking at how to create livelihood at times. And so this is not anti, creating livelihood and being productive. It's not about creativity either. It's about creating space really and moving into spaces. So the whiteboard becomes a space for our relationship. It's kind of like a third space. It's my space, her space. We even divide our spaces for our working. I have my office, she has hers. And the whiteboard is sort of becomes this attractor of strange ideas, of happiness. We have colored pens and we can write on there at any time and put up something like I did this morning. And I wrote up there, I says, how do we become strangers? Stranger is interesting because I do think fear is very much related to today. We're in an economy and a political structure, ideological structure, constantly creating fear of the stranger, often called the idea of fear of the other, fear of difference. And we know this is creating a huge polarization problem in our world and will probably destroy us if we do not come to different terms and terms with our weaponry for accessing and trying to dominate through that difference, right? That polarity. So creating strange how can I become stranger to myself? How can I just become stranger? And then there's the stranger. Different words, different tones will give different meanings to what that word means. But become an attractor for stranger or strangeness, if you wish. And that I think would be a very interesting pedagogy. Pedagogy of nothing, a pedagogy of stranger. And encouraging people that is a major way to actually have a very different relationship with fear, a relationship with the culture of fear, the attention economy of fear that is continually manipulating us and profitizing off us and controlling us. And so I encourage that in all of you today, let's comment in this very short video. I can only touch on surfaces of some of these ideas. Look forward to your comments below, and we'll continue the conversation. And check out Jenny Odell, Jo's book, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, and or other works about in physics. There's the notion of a strange attractor, very important in out of equilibrium physics, and probably quantum mechanics and so on. And then this artistic aesthetic way I'm producing, which I think is a kind of fearlessness practice, is to become a strange attractor yourself, and you will have a very different relationship with fear for the rest of it.